I am not allowed, based on our marriage laws and the contract we signed with each other,
Right.
to have sex with anybody else.
Right.
So these urges that come, I have to share them with the one person I decide to spend the rest of my life with.
Right.
So that brings me back to my soundbite.
Okay.
Right? I don't understand, and this is what we can discuss as a woman, because I don't want to say it's a man versus woman thing, but a lot of women do complain, oh, my husband's always on me. Why is he always on me? If sex is going to be a chore for you that you don't really want to do, why do women constantly push monogamy on men? If you know that you don't want to have to deal with him all the time just wanting you, why do you push monogamy on men?
Well, who's to say I pushed anything on anybody? Like,
I was just listening to the Devales and their conversation about monogamy and sex drive. And this is something that I've experienced. It's something that comes up in life. And it's just a matter of this right here. I think that as a person, not just as a man, because sometimes women have the higher sex drives too, but especially this, in most cases you hear about this are with the man. But I've heard cases of people I know where this has happened with women. It's a matter of this. When you're in that dating stage, don't do things based off of just the pace that you think society says that you should go at. You should go at a pace that's comfortable for you, right? But also, whatever pace is comfortable for you, you should also be compassionate of the other party, right? And that should be a two-sided thing. It shouldn't be a one-sided thing. And you should know that when something is going to put someone in a position for something that they're not ready or comfortable with, right, then you should communicate that and understand that and try to be compassionate towards that if you can, right? So in this case, it is why a lot of women push for monogamy, although they are not prepared for monogamy as far as keeping up with a man's sex drive. Now, a lot of women do have higher sex drives than men, but in most cases, that's not how it goes. That's not the general rule. That's not the narrative that's set out by society, right? And in these cases, I think that a man's options are this. Set your program, set how it is that you're going to deal with that woman, and have an understanding that, there should be some systems in place, right? Now, first thing you should do is just assess and make sure that there's sexual attraction that's mutual, right? Not just for the sake of a relationship, not someone trying to make you think that they like you because they want a relationship, but actual, genuine sexual attraction. And that's why I believe in going biology first. Then after that, you need to make sure that when it comes to the pleasure involved, that there is an honest exchange and reciprocity and mutuality of desire and pleasure that's going on. And then after you check that out, now you have chemistry, now you have compatibility. Now you need to actually have those conversations about how often you want to do it, right? Now, these are things that can change over time, but this is one thing I suggest. Maybe it won't work for everyone, but this is my suggestion. One thing that I've learned, and I've been in this situation before, is if a woman doesn't have the same sex drive as you, but she cares, she knows how to be compassionate towards your needs, and understands that the fact that you're in a situation where you can't have sex with other people, it means that that responsibility falls between you and her, and that it can't be outsourced. If that's the understanding, then what she can do to be generous or to be compassionate is to say, okay, cool, my sex drive for vaginal intercourse is not as high as his sex drive. So what she can do is to set out a couple days a week, 1-2 days a week, maybe more, where she's going to set a certain amount of energy aside to make sure that she's giving her man some head. Like, there's different things you do. It doesn't even have to be head all the time, but just as long as he's getting a release through that partnership on a regular basis, that's something that's important, right? Now, this is how it can be done. You take that desire, right? If her sex drive isn't as high, then you learn to separate the idea of oral sex from it being something for the purpose of connecting, right? Now, it is somewhat for connecting, and this is an intimate experience, but you got to understand this. Sometimes a woman's sex drive is worn out by her being emotionally and mentally drained. And if she's emotionally and mentally drained, then what can happen is that if oral sex is attached to the idea of vaginal intercourse to the point where it also drains her battery as far as her sex drive, then you want to keep that somewhat separate. And this is what I mean. Oral sex can be used as something that's used for stress relief, and you can do that with sex too, but it takes time. You can't use something that starts to feel like a chore and then turn that into something for stress relief on the flip of a dime. So what you can do is take oral sex and treat that as, okay, cool. You're going to dedicate some time towards getting as good at it as you possibly can. Challenge yourself. Find different things that are fun to do. Treat it like a game, right? And do it for egotistical purposes, right? If your ego is big enough to be selfish about that, about not wanting to meet the needs of your partner, then your ego can also say you're going to take pleasure in being able to drive this man up a wall with how good your head is, right? Now, you do that as stress relief, and you do it as an ego boost, right? And you separate it somewhat from the idea of that being something that you just do as a precursor to sex foreplay. That's something that always leads into sex. Therefore, it carries the same amount of pressure and stress involved, right? Now, the next thing you do is you can slow down the pace of sex to it being when the lower libido partner wants to do it to an extent. You can have some type of signal, something that lets you know, like where she can initiate herself, but if she wants you to initiate, she can do something that can spark, like letting you know that is communicated between you both to let you know that she wants you to initiate that night. It could be anything. It could be what she wears to bed that night. It could be having on a certain perfume. It could be, kissing on your neck. You never know what it is, right? But it's just one of those things where when that happens, it could be, scooting her butt up against you in the bed. It's different things she can do to let you know that she's ready, so that instead of there being pressure on her, and then there's frustration on your side and pressure on her side, you can turn that into a situation where you get to have oral sex on a pretty steady basis. And then as she's working towards this, the matter is this. Sometimes it's about drives, but sometimes it's about sexual repression. When I was listening to Devale and his wife, one thing that came to mind was there's a certain level of sexual repression involved, and a certain level of doing something to get something when it came to the idea of sexuality, right? And I think I've seen some of their videos that gave off this impression before. I'm sure they probably do have an enjoyable sex life, but it's one of those things where sometimes sex is used like a Scooby snack as a reward, and the withholding of sex is used as the punishment. And then sometimes it's just something that is not seen as necessary or a need in order to maintain the relationship. Like sometimes some women don't see being in a monogamous relationship as being responsible for the man's needs. So another aspect of it goes like this. Once you get rid of that pressure from the transactional side of things when it comes to sexuality, then you learn to do it because you want to do it. And how you do this is you take those thoughts. When you have a sexual thought, don't dismiss it, don't force it, but play with the idea in your mind. And when you play with the idea in your mind, what's going to happen is this is going to create sexual arousal, right? You keep track of your mind. You're aware of your thoughts. And when these thoughts come up, you let them stir up until you get turned on, right? Now, you let that energy build up so that when you get back to the person who you're trying to sleep with, that energy is built up so that desire is going to be there, right? It's not a matter of having no desire, having sexuality completely blocked out of your mind. And then when that person who's already turned on because they've been doing the same thing, now they come along and it seems like it feels like pressure because they're on 100, you're on 0 or 20 or whatever, and they're already ready. So it's just a matter of try to have yourself ready. If you know that this may be a time that you want this to happen, if they want this to happen, just prepare yourself by playing with the idea in your mind, right? And this is just a way of going about this, because there's different things that go along. There's different things that happen. One thing that can happen is that the idea of scheduling sex can kill the desire. But I think it's really a matter of if you're sexually repressed or not. Because if you have a certain level of sexual repression, then the idea of planning or making conscious decisions or taking responsibility for sexuality, instead of it being something that only happens on the drop of a dime, that's something that kills desire. So if you take that scheduled mindset and you kind of put that more into the realm of oral sex and foreplay and just doing that to completion, and then treating that in a way where it boosts your ego and using it as a stress reliever, then it counteracts the pressure, or it counteracts the mundanity that comes with things being scheduled. And then you chill out on the penetrative sex for a little while until that desire gets built back up, but you have to be open to it. If you're not open to it, then all you're going to do is just stop the sex altogether, and then that's going to still lead to the deterioration of the relationship. But if your mindset is that you're going to let that build up, and you're open to it and you want it to happen, you're just not forcing things or doing things that you don't want to do like a chore, then that happens. But another answer, or how to go about this in the first place, is just to not put yourself in a monogamous situation until you have a certain level of sexual chemistry and compatibility when it comes to both quality and quantity, right? And then also just having an understanding with the woman that you're with is that in case she wants to bait and switch, just let her know, like, hey, listen, if we're together and I'm being neglected, like, I'm either going to ask to open up the situation or I'm just going to cheat on you. And I know that sounds crass, I know that sounds wild, but one thing to understand about a lot of women in the dating realm is you may think a woman wants to have sex with you more than she really does. Sometimes it's just an evolutionary, and I don't, like I say all the time, I don't believe in evolution, but evolutionary psychology makes a lot of sense when we're talking about the reasons behind why people do things. So let's say in the process of the dating realm, when she feels the scent of another woman around you, it turns her on. It creates this competition, and this competition raises her sex drive from an egotistical standpoint. And when this raise in her sex drive comes, then it increases the level she wants to have sex with you, right? This is something that happens like in an evolutionary psychology perspective. Let's say that when a woman sees a man, and because that man has a lot of options with other women, it turns her on, or she becomes attracted to him, because instead of her having to evaluate that man to see if they're compatible, all she has to do is look at the fact that other women are interested in him, and then it causes her to become interested. So this can work in the same way with the idea of mate guarding, is where when the other women are hot on the heels, if someone doesn't have an integrated sexuality, then they will still go back into their egoistic mindset of wanting to protect their partner, to shield and to guard their partners, mate guarding. So, sometimes that is something that can get you over for a short period of time. Like, let's say you're in a marriage or you're in a relationship. I know a lot of people wouldn't agree with this type of thing, but sometimes the knowing that another person is hot on the heels of the person that you want to be with, or hot on your heels, then it'll stir up a certain level of jealousy, and that jealousy will cause them to see you in a higher light as far as value, and then that value will cause things to be different. Because sometimes what happens in relationships is a lot of women use sex transactionally in order to get a relationship, but the issue with it is this: a relationship is, even though it's a daily commitment, it's a one-time commitment. As soon as you make it official, that's when it happens. So it's like you're working, having sex with this person up until the point of a relationship, or up until the point of commitment, and then after the commitment, there's the bait and switch. Because even if someone is genuine and earnest in what they feel about the situation, how it can often work is, it's like if you're at a job, right? Let's say you're having sex for the purpose of validation, or because there's something that you want, and not just doing it because you desire to do it because you have a natural sex drive. So in these cases, what can happen is, because someone's sexual desire is based off of validation instead of based off of desire, that validation is like a payment, right? So after the relationship has been given, or the marriage has been given, there's nothing else really left else to give, and nothing that has the same level of value or of importance. So you gotta go into cruise control, you go into coasting mode, and then eventually the things that you did because there was something you wanted to get out of it, you don't do anymore. So men often may stop taking their women out on fancy dates, they may stop giving flowers, all these extra things that they used to do, and women will usually slow down on the sex. Why? Because these weren't things that came naturally to the person all the time. While they can, sometimes these are things that a person does just to impress the person to get what they want. But this is my issue with the idea of transactional sex and transactional relationships in the first place. I don't have an issue with transactional in and of itself. Like I've said before, while I don't partake in that, I don't have an issue with the idea of, I don't have an issue with the idea of sex work. It's one of the oldest professions. It's something that happens. There's nothing that we can do to stop it. It should be legal, because there are a lot of men out there who become aggressive with society because of their lack of access to sex. So by making that available, I feel like this will also help out with different things, and it'll also force some women to learn to negotiate a relationship and relationship terms with more than just trying to leverage access to sex. So it'll help out in a couple of ways with society. But when we look at this type of thing and we say, okay, cool, when it's a transactional type of situation, it's like if you have a job and you go to that job and you're working, right? And in the process of working, let's say you get paid weekly. You have motivation to make sure that you're maintaining your work ethic throughout those days where you're not getting paid. But let's say you get paid every 2 weeks, like most people do. You might start to fade a little bit. Not everybody. It depends on your discipline level. But discipline isn't necessarily full of passion, right? And sex is a passion thing, but it's also a discipline thing if you're in a monogamous situation. So let's say you get paid once a month. Now that's different. The less often you get paid and less consistently you get paid, in a way that validates you, that makes you feel like you've gotten reward, the harder it is to remain consistent at what it is that you're doing to get the reward, right? So let's say you're in a relationship. Let's say the relationship is the reason she wanted sex. After she gets the relation up into it, where she feels like it's getting closer to that date, she'll be more sexually available. After it's been confirmed, she may be more sexually unavailable, and for a little while she will be, because it's exciting. But after that's worn off, there may just be a matter of time before the frequency goes down. So one way of doing that is an open relationship. A lot of people don't agree with those, but hey, listen, sometimes that's what you got to do. And not that you have to, but if you're open to it, it is an option. You should look at all the options that are available and choose what works best for you. But in the situation where you understand that, listen, I'm not going to not have my needs met. I think that, I'm not the biggest fan of unconditional love. Well, I'm a fan of unconditional love, but not unconditional relationship and not unconditional exclusivity. There's an unspoken agreement when it comes to exclusivity. That is that the other person is the one who is responsible for your needs, and they should do that pretty consistently. Like, I've been in friends with benefits situations before that were exclusive. Not all of them, but there have been some that I was exclusive within those friends with benefits situations. And if the woman became inconsistent after a little while, then my mindset would be, okay, listen, I want to tell her that I can't be exclusive with you if you're not being consistent. And consistent doesn't mean every day. It can be a couple times a week. But as long as my needs are reasonably met, then we can be consistent. But if they're not, then I have to still explore my options. And some people say that this is wrong, but I'll say this. I think that it is more realistic and more compassionate to not put your entire sex drive on one woman if she can't handle it, right? Because that's going to create frustration for you. That's going to create resentment from her. It's resentment on both sides due to a lack of compatibility. Now, and the reason I say don't automatically just go ahead and break up in these situations is sometimes a man's sex drive may be exacerbated. It may be, exaggerated because of maybe trying to overcompensate or different things that may be going on. Maybe he's frustrated with a woman already. Sometimes a woman's sex drive is going to be depleted due to medicine she may be taking, maybe birth control, maybe antidepressants, maybe what else could be? It could be children, it could be whatever is going on in her life, right? There's different things. Sometimes it may just be she's gotten used to you and you don't do or say anything that surprises her anymore, so it doesn't pique her interest, right? So if these are the cases, sometimes the state of being is not that you aren't actually sexually compatible. Sometimes it's just that the places that you're in, there's an imbalance, and that imbalance is causing the man to go forward and the woman to go back, right? And maybe that's just your natural inclination. So, in those cases, there are ways to work through that. A lot of cases aren't worth it, and some of them aren't able to, but sometimes it's worth it, and sometimes you're able to do it. But you just have to understand the systems. You have to understand how people think and know how to regrow sexual desire. You have to know how to create sexual desire, and you have to know how to create systems, because certain aspects of sexuality work on a different level of skill. So let's say on one hand you have passion, right? That's something that you do when you feel like it. You do it in the heat of the moment. You also have ego, which is something that you do for a feeling of power, right? Something you do for a feeling of power, something that you do to make yourself feel better if you're feeling down, or something you do to, sometimes people do it to punish themselves, but that's a different conversation. But at the same time, it's a certain egotistical mindset about it. Sometimes you do it because you feel like the person's high value. Sometimes you do it because you feel like the person's low value. It's different egotistical things that go into sexual desire, right? Sometimes you just do it out of curiosity. It's just something that piques your interest, right? It's not necessarily pure desire alone, but it's something that piques desire, right? Piques interest, right? So then after that, you also have hard skills. And hard skills are things that you can do without a lot of emotional investment. And that's why I think that it's important to have all three levels of sexual motivation understood, so that you don't find yourself in a position where a situation is a dead bedroom relationship. These are three strategies. You have your passion, which you need to protect. You protect that by avoiding doing things that are forced, but at the same time, consistency is still something that is somewhat expected, or is just at least makes sense of being in an exclusive situation. So outside of that, then you have your ego, which is something that people see as a bad thing, but you can use it. You can use it. Let's say for a woman, if you can make your mindset about having sex with this man is that, well, you want to give this man head so good that his toes curl up, or that his eyes roll in the back of his head, or that that he passes out, or whatever it is that you want to do. Let's say you set these goals or these things that you're trying to do, or maybe you watch some porn or some videos or whatever kind of acts you like outside of coitus and penetration, and you say, okay, cool, these are some goals I have. These are some things that I think are fun. By doing this, I'm going to be crossing things off my bucket list. By doing these things, these are things that are going to improve my own self-esteem. They're going to make me feel like I'm more sexually explorative and more sexually experienced. And you do those things from a basis of not just desire, but of your ego, right? And then you have hard skills, which are things that you can do without thinking about it. Now, understand, the fact that you already feel like sex is a chore says that from the beginning, sex has somewhat been a transactional situation for you. And since it's somewhat been a transactional situation for you, take that power back. Make that something that is an understood fact about certain aspects of your relationship, but confine that into a smaller space. Confine that into a space of a certain mindset that you can go into, so that you can separate that from the feeling of being resentful about doing something you don't want to do. Separate that. And when you separate those things, now you have a trifecta of ways to keep sex consistent within your situation without one person growing in resentment for the other person. And as long as the man understands this as well, then it's something that can give you some time to regrow the natural sexual desire for one another.